You think you know someone, until you find out they've been hiding the one thing that could destroy everything you believe about them. What do you do when the person you trust most betrays you in the worst way possible? When you're left standing there, holding the shattered pieces of a life you thought was perfect, and realize you were blind to the truth all along. I thought I knew her better than anyone. I trusted her with everything: my heart, my dreams, my future. And yet, in the dark corners of our life together, she kept a secret. A secret so deep, so devastating, that when I finally discovered it, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The signs were there, but I never saw them. She was always so perfect, so kind, so loving until she wasn't. I didn't see it coming. I didn't know that the woman I loved, the one I thought would never betray me, was hiding something so dark. I had no idea just how much she had been lying to me, and when I found out, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to face. But let me take you back to the moment everything changed. To the moment I found out everything. The truth. The betrayal. The heartbreak. You won't believe how it all unfolded. We were one of those couples that everyone envied. People would say we were the perfect pair, the kind of relationship that everyone dreams of. From the moment we met, everything felt right. It was like we were meant to be. There was this natural connection between us, an effortless bond that seemed unbreakable. Every conversation felt meaningful. Every date was an adventure. We talked about everything, from our childhoods to our wildest dreams for the future. She was my best friend. She was the one I turned to when I needed someone to listen. She was always there for me, supporting me in ways I hadn't even realized I needed, and I thought I was doing the same for her. I thought our connection was something special, something real. We had the kind of love that people wrote songs about. We shared everything: laughter, hopes, fears. We didn't just love each other, we respected each other. She was my safe place, and I believed I was hers. But like any relationship, we had our struggles. Nothing ever seemed too serious. There were times when we'd argue over little things: who forgot to pick up groceries, or whose turn it was to do the dishes. But we always worked through them. At least, that's what I told myself. I knew her better than anyone else, or so I thought. She had this way of making everything feel effortless. We would talk for hours about anything and everything. We'd plan trips, talk about our dreams, and make plans for the future. I honestly couldn't imagine my life without her in it. I trusted her completely. But like everything, over time there were small changes. Minor shifts that, at the time, didn't seem important. At first it was the late nights at work. I chalked it up to stress. It's normal, right? We all get busy sometimes. But then, she started spending more time with her phone. She'd be on it constantly, even when we were together. At first I didn't think much of it. It was just a habit. People get lost in their phones these days. But as the days passed, I noticed she was becoming more distant. The conversation started feeling different, more surface level. There were fewer moments of deep connection, fewer laughs, fewer I love yous. She wasn't the same person I had fallen in love with. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, that maybe work was stressing her out. But deep down, I could feel it. Something wasn't right. She wasn't the woman I had built my world around. It started so small, so subtly, that I didn't even realize it at first. When you're in a relationship, especially one as close and connected as ours, you tend to believe that nothing can tear you apart. At least, that's what I thought. It was easy to ignore the little signs, to dismiss them as just the normal ups and downs of life. But in hindsight I see now that I was just too blind to notice what was right in front of me. The first thing I noticed was how much she started to retreat into her own world. Emily had always been someone who loved to talk, to share her day with me, to let me in on the smallest details of her life. But slowly, those conversations began to dwindle. We would sit together in silence more and more often. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just tired, or that work was getting to her. She was always busy, always juggling 100 things at once. I understood. I was busy too. But there were moments when she would come home, and it was like she wasn't really there. She would sit on the couch, glued to her phone, scrolling, texting. At first I didn't think much of it. I figured everyone has their distractions, their little ways of unwinding after a long day. But it started to feel like I wasn't a part of her world anymore. The affection, the warmth we used to share, began to fade. The playful kisses, the gentle touches, those things that had once felt so natural, were becoming fewer and farther between. It wasn't a dramatic change. No, it was a slow fade. Little by little, Emily pulled away. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a phase. Relationships go through rough patches, don't they? And then there were the late nights. She'd come home later and later, always with some excuse: working late, catching up with a friend, running errands. I didn't think it was anything to worry about at first. It seemed plausible. After all, Emily was always so driven, always on top of things. I admired her for that. She never let anything slip, never missed a beat. She was the kind of person who would work tirelessly to get everything done, even at the expense of her own time. I respected that about her. But, the later she came home, the more I felt like I was losing her. There were nights when I'd fall asleep alone, waiting for her to come home, and when she finally did, it felt like she wasn't even there. She'd slide into bed, careful not to wake me, her body tense and distant. She'd lie there, facing away from me, as if we were strangers. I tried to break the silence, to make her talk, to ask about her day, but she was always so short with me. Her answers were vague, almost like she was holding something back. It wasn't just that she wasn't talking. It was that she was shutting me out. And I couldn't understand why. We'd go days without having a real conversation. Even when we did talk, it felt like she wasn't really listening. It was as if her mind was elsewhere. I tried to shake the feeling, to convince myself that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to face it. It felt too real, too heavy to acknowledge. So, I pretended that nothing was happening, that she was just tired, that work had been stressful, that maybe I was overthinking things. But I wasn't overthinking. I was just trying to make sense of what I couldn't understand. The turning point came one evening when I walked into the living room and caught her on the phone. She was sitting on the couch, her legs curled underneath her, speaking softly but hurriedly. I didn't think much of it at first, but something felt off. She didn't notice me standing in the doorway, and I could hear the way her voice changed when she spoke. She was laughing, a soft giggle, the kind I hadn't heard in weeks. The way she laughed sounded different. There was an energy there, a lightness in her tone that felt unfamiliar. I knew that laugh. It was the same one she used when she talked to her friends, the one that was full of joy, of excitement. But it was the way she acted when she saw me standing there, catching her off guard, that made everything feel wrong. She quickly ended the call, her face going pale as she turned to face me. I stood there, unsure of what to say. But she spoke before I could ask. "It was just my friend, Sarah," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "We were just catching up. Nothing to worry about," but there was something in her eyes, something that made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable for even asking. I nodded, but the unease settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that laugh, about how everything felt so different. How could she laugh like that around someone else, when I couldn't get more than a few words out of her? I kept thinking back to the way she avoided my gaze, how she seemed to withdraw when I came near her. It wasn't just the late nights, the phone calls, or the distance. It was the emotional withdrawal, the absence of the woman I once knew so well. I tried to brush it off, but it kept coming back. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I felt like I was losing her, like she was slipping away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went. Emily wasn't herself anymore, and I couldn't figure out why, and the worst part, I didn't know if she'd ever come back. The truth has a way of finding you, even when you try to hide from it. I had been avoiding the truth for weeks, maybe longer. I kept telling myself that everything would be fine, that the strange distance between us would eventually fade away. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever. I knew something was wrong, and the more I ignored it, the more it ate away at me. The truth would come, sooner or later, and when it did, I couldn't stop it. It was one of those nights when I couldn't sleep. I had tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of her, of us. I heard her in the bathroom, the sound of the water running, her movements soft and deliberate. I tried to focus on the ceiling, to breathe, to calm myself, but I couldn't. The fear of what I might find weighed heavily on my chest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something was being hidden from me, and that feeling wasn't going away. When she left the bathroom, I saw it, her phone. Sitting on the kitchen counter right in front of me, unlocked. It was like it was calling to me, silently begging me to look. I told myself to leave it alone. I tried to ignore it. But the curiosity, that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, pushed me forward. I told myself it was just a quick look, just to put my mind at ease. I reached for her phone, my hands were shaking. I couldn't remember ever feeling so nervous to touch something so simple. But there it was, lying on the counter, unlocked. She'd never left it like that before. Had she done it on purpose, or was she just careless? I didn't know, but I didn't care. I picked it up. The messages were the first thing I saw. At first they didn't seem like much, just the usual texts from friends, work, the kind of messages I had seen before. But then, I noticed a thread that was different from the others. It was a conversation between Emily and someone I didn't recognize. The words were intimate. There was no other way to describe them. The messages felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It wasn't just casual texting. It wasn't just a simple flirtation. It was deep, it was personal. They were talking about things I didn't understand: plans to meet up, affectionate nicknames, feelings being shared that were supposed to be mine. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt like the ground beneath me had been ripped away. I couldn't stop reading. My eyes moved across the screen, as if the words were pulling me in, forcing me to see more, to understand more. I wanted to stop. I wanted to look away, to pretend that none of this was happening, that I wasn't seeing what I was seeing, but I couldn't. The worst part. The realization that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. The messages were consistent, like a secret life Emily had been living without me. She'd been hiding something from me, something so deep that it broke my trust completely. There were mentions of dates, locations, plans to meet up. They were planning to see each other again, to continue whatever had been going on. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to believe it, but the proof was right there. I dropped the phone on the counter. My body felt numb, my mind raced, but it couldn't make sense of what had just happened. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I see it sooner? I felt like I had been living in a lie for so long, and now the truth was crashing down on me. The woman I loved, the one I had trusted, was betraying me in the worst way. I couldn't comprehend it. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the texts. It was the realization that she had built a life with someone else. Someone she had shared her feelings with, someone who was clearly important to her, someone who wasn't me, and that's when I knew. I had to confront her. I didn't wait. I didn't give myself time to think, or second-guess it. I walked straight into the living room, where Emily was sitting on the couch, reading a book. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't seen the look on my face. She didn't know I had discovered everything. I couldn't say anything at first. The words were trapped in my throat, but the pain and betrayal were too overwhelming. She could see it in my face. She knew. She knew what I had found. I asked her one simple question: "What's going on, Emily?" She tried to deny it at first, like I was mistaken, like there had been some misunderstanding. But her voice cracked, and she knew I wasn't going to let it go. I pushed harder. "Tell me the truth," I demanded. And that's when she broke down. She told me everything: the affair, the lies, the deceit. She admitted it all, and even though I had already seen the truth in her phone, hearing it from her lips made everything more real, more painful. I could feel my heart shattering. The person I thought I knew so well was gone. She wasn't the woman I had built my life with. She wasn't the person I had trusted. She was someone completely different. As she spoke, I felt the walls close in on me. The anger and hurt surged through me, but I couldn't speak. I just stood there, feeling completely numb. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but all I could do was stand there and listen to her explain how it all happened, how she had fallen for someone else, how she had justified it, how she thought I wouldn't find out. The air between us felt thick, suffocating, as I stood there, trying to process what Emily had just admitted. I could feel the weight of her confession pressing down on me, but I couldn't move. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make it stop. But instead, I just stood there, silent, as she sat on the couch, her eyes full of regret. The pain in her eyes made it worse, but the betrayal, that was what really hurt. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, as if it was trying to drown out the reality of what was happening. It didn't feel real. This couldn't be happening to me. How could she do this? How could someone I trusted so completely turn their back on me like this? I wanted answers. I needed answers. How long, Emily? The words were barely a whisper at first, but they cut through the silence like a knife. I had to know. I couldn't stand not knowing. I couldn't stand the idea that she had been living this double life while I had been blind to everything. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make this better. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked again, my voice louder now, more desperate. I needed to hear it. I needed to know if this was just a mistake, or if it had been something deeper, something more real. Her eyes dropped to the floor. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, and it felt like the world was closing in on me. She finally spoke, her voice soft and trembling, but the words still hit me like a ton of bricks. "A few months," she said, barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. A few months? That's all it took. That's how long she had been living a life I didn't know about, a life that didn't include me. It was like someone had reached inside and torn out everything I thought I knew. My mind was spinning. A few months? That was enough time for her to form a relationship with someone else. Enough time to build a connection that I had never seen. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside of me, but it was quickly swallowed by the sadness, the confusion, the complete sense of betrayal. Why him? Why not me? Her face twisted in pain. She didn't have an answer. At least not one that could make any of this make sense. She opened her mouth, but no words came out for a moment. I was lonely," she said, almost too quietly to hear. I felt like you weren't there for me, Ethan. I felt neglected. Oh, neglected. That's why she did it. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Neglected. I had given her everything I had. How could she say that? I had tried so hard to be there for her. How could she think that was enough to justify what she had done? The hurt was overwhelming. It consumed me. Lonely, I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You didn't feel lonely when we were together? You didn't feel loved when I was with you? When I gave you everything I had, I shook my head, my chest tightening as the anger threatened to explode. How could you throw all of that away for someone else? She opened her mouth to speak. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want her excuses. I didn't want to hear about the reasons why she had done it, why she felt justified. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that she had betrayed me. That she had broken something that was unbreakable in my eyes. How long was it going on? I asked again, this time my voice steady, controlled. But the hurt was still there, buried beneath the surface, threatening to rise again. How long did you keep this from me? Her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. She didn't have a good enough reason to make this okay. There was no good reason. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. But she had. She had told me through her actions, through the lies, through everything she had kept hidden. She had told me in the most painful way possible. The lies, the deceit, they were worse than any words she could say now. The damage had already been done, and no apology, no explanation, could ever take that back. I stood up, unable to stay in the same room any longer. I needed space. I needed time to breathe, to process what had just happened. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of anger, of betrayal. But most of all, it was a deep, gnawing sense of loss. I didn't know who this person was anymore. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved, was no longer the person sitting across from me, and that was the hardest part. I had lost her. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. And as soon as they did, I knew they were the truth. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. How could I? She didn't say anything. She just sat there, crying, as if there was anything she could say to undo what she had done. But there was nothing. The damage was done. And I didn't know how to fix it. I sat in the silence of the house we once shared, surrounded by fragments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The laughter, the dreams, the plans, all of it seemed distant now, like they had happened in another lifetime. The betrayal was no longer just something she had done, it was something I was living with every second of the day. The first few nights after our confrontation were the hardest. Sleep was a stranger. I'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment over and over in my head. What did I miss? Was there a sign I ignored? Did I make her feel like she wasn't enough? The questions kept coming, but the answers didn't. And honestly, even if they had, I don't think they would have helped. On the third night I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not the kind of crying where a few tears fall, and you wipe them away quickly, hoping no one sees. No, this was the kind of crying that breaks you open. The kind where your body shakes, and the pain feels like it's tearing you apart from the inside. I hadn't cried like that since I was a kid, and in that moment I realized something. I wasn't crying because I lost her. I was crying because I had lost myself. The days after were a blur of confusion and anger. Her words kept playing in my mind, like a broken record I couldn't turn off. I didn't mean to hurt you, I felt lonely, we didn't plan for this to happen. It was as if she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. But it didn't matter. Intentions didn't erase the betrayal. Excuses didn't make it hurt less. I tried to keep myself busy. I threw myself into work, taking on every project I could. My coworkers noticed something was wrong, but they didn't press. They just gave me space, which was exactly what I needed. But no matter how much I worked, no matter how many hours I spent at the office, the thoughts followed me. They whispered to me in the quiet moments, in the spaces between tasks, and no matter how much I tried to drown them out, they were always there. One night, about a week after it all came crashing down, I decided I couldn't stay in the house anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw memories of her. The couch where we'd sit and talk for hours, the kitchen where we'd cook together, the bedroom where we'd dreamed about the future. It was all tainted now. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. I packed a bag and left. I didn't have a plan or a destination in mind, I just drove. For hours, I drove through the city, through the countryside, through places I hadn't seen in years, and somewhere along the way, as the sun began to rise, I realized something. I wasn't running from her. I was running toward myself. It's funny how life has a way of teaching you lessons you didn't ask for. The pain, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, they all forced me to look at myself in ways I never had before. In the chaos of heartbreak, I found clarity, though it wasn't easy to accept. I remember sitting in that small cafe a few days after I left the house. The city was quiet in the early morning hours, and I watched the world wake up while I sat with my thoughts. I hadn't realized how disconnected I had become. From her, from myself, from everything that really mattered. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I kept my head down and kept going, I could escape feeling the emptiness that was starting to surround me. But you can only ignore it for so long. The first lesson I learned was that neglect doesn't always come in the form of physical absence. Emily wasn't absent in the traditional sense. She didn't stop coming home or stop talking to me. But in a way she was still neglecting me. She had been emotionally unavailable for so long, and I hadn't even seen it. The subtle shifts in her behavior, the small emotional withdrawals, they were signs I should have paid attention to. I kept telling myself that it was normal, that every relationship goes through tough times. But I didn't realize until it was too late that the biggest mistake I made was failing to notice her need for connection. It wasn't just her emotional distance that caused the fracture. It was my own neglect of our emotional intimacy. I had become so absorbed in my own life, my work, my own stress, that I had forgotten to check in with her, to ask how she was really feeling. I had taken her for granted, assumed she would always be there, that she would always understand. I thought love was enough. I thought it would carry us through the tough moments without the need for constant effort. I was wrong. The second lesson I learned was about trust. Trust isn't just about believing in someone else's word, it's about believing in yourself enough to recognize when something feels off. I had trusted Emily blindly, without question. I trusted her so much that I ignored my own instincts. There were moments when I felt something was wrong, when I sensed a distance growing between us, but I didn't act on it. I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to confront the possibility that the woman I loved was slipping away from me, and that hesitation cost me. Looking back, I can see now that trust in a relationship isn't just about not lying, it's about openness, vulnerability, and communication. If we had talked more openly, if I had been more honest about my feelings and asked her to do the same, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad. But in the end, I couldn't blame her entirely. I had failed to create a space where honesty could thrive. But the hardest lesson came when I realized something deeper about myself. I had built my whole identity around her, around us. I thought I was nothing without her. I thought that the love we had was the only thing that defined me. But when it was gone, I was left wondering who I was. It was a devastating realization, but it was also freeing. I had put my happiness, my peace, in someone else's hands. I had let my self-worth be defined by someone who couldn't even value me enough to stay true. It took me a long time to come to terms with that. I had to learn how to love myself again, how to find strength within myself without relying on anyone else to fill that void. The truth was, I had always been whole, I had always been enough. But in the wake of betrayal, I forgot that. I forgot that my worth didn't depend on anyone else, not even Emily. That realization didn't come overnight. It wasn't some epiphany that happened in an instant. It came slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping over a dark horizon. I had to sit with my pain, my anger, and my grief. I had to face all of it, and in doing so, I found the strength to heal. The final lesson, the one that took the longest to accept, was that it's okay to walk away. It's okay to leave something behind when it no longer serves you. It's okay to love someone but know when it's time to let go. Emily and I had shared something beautiful, something real. But the love we once had was broken, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix it. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to heal. As much as it hurt, as much as I still loved her, I knew I had to move on. And that was the hardest part of all. Letting go. Not because I didn't want to fight for us, but because I had to fight for myself. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I can't help but think about how far I've come. It wasn't easy. There were days when I thought I would never feel like myself again, days when the pain of betrayal seemed too much to bear. But here I am, standing on the other side of it. Stronger, wiser, and more aware of who I truly am. The journey wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks. Moments when I thought I couldn't go on. But through it all, I realized something: healing takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen because you want it to. It happens because you decide, in the depths of your pain, that you're worth more than the heartache that's been weighing you down. What I've learned through all of this is simple: trust is everything. But trust starts with yourself. It starts with knowing that you deserve love that is honest, love that is true, love that builds you up and doesn't tear you down. If someone can't give you that, then it's okay to walk away. I'm not saying it's easy, it never is. But when you face betrayal, when you face heartbreak, the most important thing you can do is take care of yourself. Don't lose yourself in someone else's mistakes. Don't let their actions define your worth. You are enough, just as you are. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to walk away from the things that hurt you. I don't know what the future holds for me, or if I'll ever find love again. But I do know that I'm no longer afraid to be on my own. I know my worth now, and that's more important than any relationship, no matter how much it once meant to me.